Just wanted to introduce myself before we start off on this panel. By day, I am a PR guy. I work for an agency called On PR. It's a high-tech focused agency working with some big names doing some international PR and analyst relations programs. By night, I'm a blogger and a father and a family guy and a skier. I write a blog at Wearable Tech Watch, which is on WordPress. I think some of you might have visited in the last couple of days. The traffic's been going through the roof. I'm getting more and more fascinated by wearable technology. And in my 20-plus years in PR, I've followed and possibly been responsible for a few hype topics, or partly responsible anyway. So the dot-com boom, I was there. I worked for a Texan computer company that later got bought by a Californian computer company. Storage area networks, or the Open SAN. E-commerce, the revolution that was grid computing that became cloud computing, big data, all of these topics in virtualization, Hyper-V and stuff like that. Now, apart from the mobile phone or the smartphone, I don't think that any of these technologies were as accessible to the mass market as wearable technology. That's why I find that wearable technology is a pretty exciting topic. In fact, this morning, the hotel I'm staying in was kind enough to deliver a copy of USA Today to my room. So on the way here, I was reading through it. And there's a half page in USA Today on smartwatches. So you know that the technology's made it just before Christmas when a mainstream newspaper like that is covering this and talking about the hype. So, to today's first panel, wearable technology, hardware and software. This is the nuts and bolts of these smart devices. And so, if you like, it's the nuts and bolts of what we're going to be seeing in a year's time in Target and in Best Buy. What's inside the devices and how they do it is actually critically important. And to tell us why, we've put together a panel of experts. We're going to talk about why it matters, what you try and put inside, and how you try and run it. And there's certainly a lot of choice out there. So let's introduce Sujata Naidig from Freescale, come on up. Also Jeff Torrance from CSR, and Hamid Farzaneh from Sensoplex, our panel of experts this morning, who are going to tell us a little bit more about this. To get us started, could we also have some water up here, please? To get us started, I'd like to introduce each panelist and ask them. So we'll start ladies first. So Sujata, if you can just spend a few minutes introducing yourself. I know you've also got a little bit to tell us about Freescale, so over to you.
So I'm Sujata Naidig. I'm a Consumer Business Development Manager at Freescale. Freescale is a company that produces technology to enable smart devices. We build embedded processors that go into applications ranging from consumer to industrial to automotive and networking. We used to be called Motorola Semiconductor, and we're spun out from Motorola in 2006. We're a global company with headquarters in Austin, Texas, but locations around the world and sales coverage around the world. We have over several thousand customers, and we develop solutions. So we provide the technology and the enablement around the technology to address all these different markets. And the wearable market is an area of growth for sure. And so we're developing solutions to help enable that growth.
Perhaps you could also tell us about what you do for Freescale.
Sure. So I'm in business development. My job is to make sure that we're listening to our customers in the markets that we target and developing the right solutions for them. So giving them the right proposals and driving our roadmaps, feeding that back to our R&D teams and helping to make sure we create the right solutions, finding the right partners in the ecosystem to work with to create these differentiated solutions, and win business with customers, generate revenue.
Okay, thank you very much. So over to you, Jeff. Can you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Jeff Torrance. I'm Vice President of Investor Relations at CSR. I'm used to talking to a very different audience. Most of them are wearing suits and ties. And generally, I'm looking to raise money for our company to invest. But one of the key areas for our enterprise is really the wearable space around Bluetooth Smart. In fact, I've got a few slides. Maybe you could put up the CSR wearable slides.
They're coming. We loaded them up earlier. Okay, while they're loading, perhaps you...
Yeah, so a little bit about the company. So we're roughly $1 billion of revenue company. Core business is growing something around 15% per year. And we're at the moment about 10% operating profit. So the way we look at the wearable space is in the context of how the internet's developed. So to your point, Simon, the key here is really how the internet's evolving. And if you like, initially there was a fixed internet, and we were all sort of playing with Mosaic and starting to explore. And then it sort of became mobile, and obviously very familiar with things like mobile, Facebook, and applications that work much better in a mobile environment. And going out in the future, we sort of see this many thanks. We see this Internet of Things. And I think that's a great vision of lots and lots of devices connected, this sort of third generation of the Internet. But in reality, we expect that some time away, there's standards and business models that have to evolve to support that. So we think there's this sort of more concrete opportunity between mobile and fixed, which we call the Internet of My Things, IMT. And we see Bluetooth Smart being absolutely critical to enabling this Internet of My Things.
Just to interrupt you for a second here, you said Bluetooth Smart. Yesterday, someone had to explain to me that Bluetooth Smart and low-power Bluetooth were actually the same thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, so let me help a little bit. So, originally it was called Wearable, and it sort of evolved, and then it became Bluetooth Low Energy. And I think this slide explains it nicely. Now we have the context of Bluetooth Smart. And Bluetooth Smart's the technology that will go in the wearable devices that allows them to then connect to what we think of as a gateway, really. The cell phone's really no longer the edge of the network. It's the gateway that's connecting lots of my devices into the cloud. And so the Bluetooth variant inside, to answer your question specifically, the Bluetooth variant inside the cell phone is Bluetooth Smart Ready. Okay. So things like the Galaxy S3 and the iPhone 4S, iPhone 5, iPhone 5S are Bluetooth Smart Ready, and then the peripherals are Bluetooth Smart. It's the same as what was Bluetooth Low Energy, just an easier name. So this would have been
the tech that Fitbit had a bit of a problem with a couple of months ago when the new Jelly Bean came out for Android. So I think more generally there is fragmentation in the Linux platforms compared with the Apple platform, and that's a software problem, but that can be solved with over-the-air reprogramming. Okay, so before we move on to Hamid, can you just tell me, Jeff, what are you looking for at this conference today? What brought you here, apart from speaking? I think really what I'd like to really get to is the essence of what we do, which is we create the chips in the wearable platforms. Okay. So to try and give some people some sense of how this Internet of My Things, this wearable space can evolve. So today we're the leading silicon provider to the #1 wearable, the headset. And what we've really done in the headset space is integrated lots of silicon to create a platform. So we're not just selling little components, we've created a whole system platform. And if you like, in the wearable space, this, by the way, this isn't our Bluetooth chip. I took one from the internet. So the original Nike Fuel Band, there's lots of electronics in there. So you can see that there's the main flexible circuit board, and then I've got all the chips. And really, we see all those chips over time, or a lot of those chips evolving into the Bluetooth Smart control point within there. And then, a lot of the functionality connecting to that anchor point. And then effectively what our company aspires to do is create a flexible, configurable platform that allows us to fulfill the vision of wearable. Okay, thank you. So a very strong play for Bluetooth being at the center of these wearables. Let's see if Hamid can tell us a bit about what he does, and maybe if he's got a different opinion on that.
Sure. My name is Hamid Farzaneh, and I'm the CEO of Sensoplex. I have done multiple startups over the last many years, but Sensoplex is the first one that is really more an enabler startup rather than a product startup. So what we provide is essentially solutions for people who want to make products. And that addresses what I call the lost art of hardware. Hardware used to be very centric to Silicon Valley, but nowadays it's really more software and the internet. And there is a need really for companies that are expert in creating the hardware and the firmware that's associated with that can make it much easier and much faster for companies to create products and take them to the market. And that's what we do. So I have about 20 slides. I will try to go through that fairly quick. And there are some key questions that I'm trying to address here. And the first one is really the state of the wearable opportunity. Are wearables is that the market real or is it a fad? What would be the core product structure look like? And is there an ecosystem that's ready really for that? And going forward, one question that came up many times during this conference is, how fast would mass adoption happen? And who would win? Who can win in that kind of a market? And at the end, I will talk about my crystal ball prediction. So there are many different buzzwords that are being thrown out. There's wearable computing, Internet of Things, augmented human quantified self. And there is a term that is not that often used, but I think that includes all of these different segments, and that's ambient intelligence. So ambient intelligence is really about having sensors and providing response. It has an electronic base, and it will be affecting consumer electronics, communications, and computing. And the goal there, the trend, will be to try to hide as much as possible of the product into the network so that what really remains visible is the user interface. To the question of whether the wearable market is real, I believe that the answer is yes. So if we look at the 5 major segments that are industrial, military, infotainment, fitness, and healthcare, they will add up to about over $30 billion according to Credit Suisse in 2016, 17, 18 timeframe. But the 3 main ones that are fitness, infotainment, and healthcare by themselves would add up to close to us, let's say between $15 and $20 billion in the 2016, 2017 timeframe. So the market is definitely real, and it is becoming fairly large. And it's also very diverse. You guys probably have seen the slide that Credit Suisse put on, and that shows the diversity. So talking about the product structure, you have the applications, and the application, whether that's sports or industrial, all of them need these 3 main components. The first one is hardware. You need an engine, you need a transmission, you need really a hardware to run applications on. The second one is the intelligence. And the third one is user experience. So user experience is absolutely critical because that's what will make the end user happy or dissatisfied with the product. But it is really the hardware that is going to enable that user experience. So what's that hardware? It's form and function, it's performance, it's battery life, and it's also the use modes, what it's going to be used for. We've been talking about whether it should be on the wrist or it should be strapped around the chest. All of these will really define what the hardware is about. But the hardware must be done right if the user experience is going to be appropriately good. Hardware, it could be either cool or it could be really a pain. And that depends really how well hardware is done. Ideally, hardware should be as easy to ship as software. And that's not always very easy. And it's often misunderstood because some people think that just, well, if you have a processor and you have some sensors and you throw in a Bluetooth radio, you're done. It's a little bit more complex than that, and if it's not done right, it can be very frustrating to the end user. Now, let's talk about the ecosystem. So the ecosystem, you need sensors of various kinds, whether they are position and inertial sensors, environmental sensors, biosensors. You need wireless connectivity, and as was just explained before, Bluetooth is a major step, especially Bluetooth low energy in that. You need processing that's cheap and ubiquitous these days. Battery technology that's not as good as we all wish. It will never be as good as we wish because there will always be more demand. As batteries improve, we will also have more reasons to consume more power for more capabilities. And then you have the ability of using big data, social media, And last but not least, the consumer behavior and consciousness of a need for that capability, whether it exists or not. So, in my opinion, we're ready really for the market to take off. Talking about mass adoption, there is that famous curve of innovators going to early adopters and early majority, late majority, and so on, and the penetration increasing gradually to 100%. So if we look at traditional markets in the past, the penetration was very slow. So it would take maybe 20 to 40 years for a market really to start taking off, and maybe 80 to 100 years to reach close to 100% penetration. More recently, things have moved much faster. So starting with the TV, it took 20 years for the market to take off, but then it reached 100% penetration over the next 20 years. But with PCs, mobile phones, and the internet, things have been going much faster. If we look at the wearable market, we're still at the very early stage, at the early adopter stage, and that's just a small point at the bottom you see. But if we look at different prognostics and different projections that have been made, this is what it should look like. So by 2020, the growth of that market should be as good or faster even than the mobile phone market. So the market is ready, and it's wide open for new entrants. They will be, and I will explain a little bit more about that. So what are the things that are really needed for a wearable business? There is the electronics in the form of hardware and firmware, algorithms, application software, back office software, industrial design, testing, manufacturing, marketing, and so on. And large companies, even large companies, I would say, have started to use external partners to provide some of these components. For small companies or startups, it's even more essential. Really, what they should be doing is that looking at the time that it takes to develop a product, which is typically about 18 months. They need really to shorten that by making maximum use of partners who are expert in their own field, whether that's the hardware and firmware or that's creation of application and so on. Looking at the market, most of the devices that exist, the Nike Fuel Band and others, are fairly simple. And it's essentially some electronics, accelerometers, some memory, and a battery. And of course, a very nice enclosure. But things are a little bit more complex than that. So on that screen, what you have in blue are what is integrated in most of the wearables today. In order to have good performance, however, you need some of the additional capabilities that are circled in red. So you need gyroscope, you need compass, pressure sensor, ambient temperature, really to provide both more precision and more capability. Beyond that, you have the other capabilities that are in dotted yellow lines, and that's what would be providing the next level. As Adidas has already introduced, some of these are already included in higher end products, but in order for these more simple wristbands to be competitive, they will have to gradually adopt some of these as well. Once that you have that platform in place, now you can really support a very wide range of capabilities, whether that's sleep, as Philippe Kahn was explaining, or monitoring different sports or activities. So a quick pitch for Sensoplex. We are experts in 4 areas: sensing, wireless, computing, and manufacturing. And we offer turnkey services that start from design all the way through low volume and high volume manufacturing to companies that want to go very fast from their decision to start a product to production. So I can call them guesses or predictions. The first one is that the market will remain fragmented. And we will have a small number of very large companies like Adidas, like Nike, and a very large number, fairly large number of specialized companies. The commoditized segments will definitely be dominated by the larger players, but the more specific segments for extreme sports will be dominated by specialized companies. And these markets are not very, well, they are much smaller than the larger market at large, but they're still large enough to support more than one player. My other prediction is that although the market is still wide open for new entrants, but that is going to start closing around 2016. So the newcomers who are going to be dominating the specialized segments will either already exist or will come into existence over the next couple of years. And what's needed for the specialized segments is really expertise. So that will be created by people who really, if it's a sport, they are practitioners of the sport, and they really thoroughly understand it, they have a passion for it, and because of that, they will be able to deliver what that tribe would require. Another prediction is that insurance companies might play for wearables, a role similar to what carriers did for smartphones, for phones in general. And the reason for that is that wearables have a great potential for improving people's health and people's well-being. And that, I believe, will be the key thing that will help insurance companies get into promoting this kind of wearables. My last, maybe more contentious prediction is that the worldwide wearable market will reach 1 billion units by 2020.
Okay, so how are we going to get there?
Yeah, so very quickly, there is a short window. There is a focus on the user experience. And also, there is an importance of companies moving very fast and really concentrating on what's really important to them.
Okay, Hamid, thank you. So let's take a look at, based on all that, and you covered a lot of ground there in those slides. Let's take a look at building a device for the next generation. I know many of you are actually involved in today's devices, and you're looking at the future, so let's give you some value. I'd like to ask Soraya, why should I bother with a cheap plastic bracelet when I can just get my phone?
So, are you talking to me?
I am.
Okay, sorry. So our job as a technology company is to provide the building blocks for companies to create wearable devices. And the key to creating a wearable device, you've seen in several presentations today, as well as all the demonstrations yesterday, is providing that differentiation and usability that a consumer will find value in and bring them value in their lives. So in order to do that, there's hardware and software to address those types of needs. If we can pull up the slide. Yep, there we go. So from a hardware perspective, the technology needs to address some of the key challenges in the wearable space. These include battery life, so that's one of the most critical components is consumers don't want to be plugging in their wearable device constantly because then it's not collecting the data and providing them the information they need. Another area is connectivity. These devices have to be connected. Whether it's connected to your cell phone and tethered to that and then your cell phone acts as the gateway, or maybe you want your wearable device to connect directly to the cloud using something like Wi-Fi. Those are trade-off decisions that each company has to make in determining what they want the wearable device to be. After that, there's the usability aspect. So the hardware needs to be able to provide, take in the data, using sensors, and then do something with that information, and also display that information. The Adidas presentation this morning showed a graphical interface that was a touch screen, really addressing some of the challenges that runners and athletes have. And those are the types of things that wearable manufacturers need to address. And then the last thing is form factor. So wearables are worn devices, and wearables have been in the market for many, many years. We talked about Bluetooth headsets yesterday and how many people have actually used Bluetooth headsets. There was a report I saw that it never reached more than 15% attach rate to smartphones because some of the challenges were in
Tethering.
how heavy it was or how big and bulky it is to wear, and people don't want to wear those all the time. So form factor is really critical, and this concept of miniaturization from a technology provider is something that we have to really focus on so we can provide our customers a way to get to that small form factor and it being thought through from the beginning. So whether it's how much we're integrating into the silicon versus what we put into packaging, what type of packaging we use. We have packaging that's designed to help reduce footprint or to be thinner packages for applications that have height restraints. And then it also is about what other components are in the system and how can you package that together so that those components all work together and are able to give you a small form factor.
Okay, so once you've got all this packaged together, thank you. I'd just like to do a quick ask the audience and be very surprised perhaps. Hands up if you're not wearing a wearable or you don't have a wearable, please, in the audience. So, okay. So most people, let's say 60-70% of people do have a wearable here. Of those people, hands up if it's failed in the last, well, since you bought it. Hands up if it's gone wrong. So I went through several wristbands from a certain manufacturer before I gave up and went to another one. What about reliability, Jeff? Is that going to be one of those questions that is going to haunt the wearable technologies industry?
I think in reality, consumers want value out of the devices they buy, and they measure it by what it can perform, how long it lasts, how much it costs. So there's a lot of parameters that go into that. For us, as a semiconductor company, what we need to do is create the solution that gives the customer the opportunity to make the most robust system. And broadly speaking, reducing the number of components is a good thing from an electronics point of view, because then you've just got less prospect for failure.
So you're saying we should put fewer components into these bands and not more?
So there's a distinction between components and function.
Okay.
So I agree, adding function, trade-off against cost and power consumption is a good thing, but you want to do that with as much integration as possible, because it's the integration that enables you to drive down the cost. Most importantly, drive down the current consumption. As you know, there's two factors that drive form factor, or the size of the form factor. One is how many components you've got, and obviously integration reduces that, but also integrating reduces the amount of current that's used passing signals between those devices, so reduces the requirement on the battery. So in the same as the cell phone business, if you look back to an old GSM phone, the PCB was large, there were lots of chips. That integration drove down cost, drove elasticity, or drove elastic demand for the product. I think the same thing will happen in wearables, and absolutely reliability has to be fixed at the same time.
Okay. So once it becomes more reliable, do you think that wearables are actually going to be able to break into the fashion industry? We've seen a lot of devices that I wouldn't say are particularly fashionable right now. They're not something that you'd think of an object of art, and you probably wouldn't spend large amounts of money on buying them. So Hamid, how are we going to make wearable technology appeal to people who want a fashion accessory?
Well, I think this is again segmentation. You will have companies that will go strictly for form, fit, and function, and you will have companies who are going to develop wearables that appeal to people who are more fashion conscious. And that can be even jewelry. But the inside of it, if we look at the electronics would be the same. It's just the presentation and the positioning that will be different. And I think that segment is definitely bound to be of a significant size.
Okay. And what about emerging technology? So a few weeks ago, I was in Shenzhen in China. I was talking to some guys who were building wristbands, and one of them told me that Bluetooth was too clunky. Didn't want to use it because the modules were too big. So instead, they'd be using RFID for transmitting data. What else do we think, to all of the panelists, what else do we think is coming down the track that might be disruptive in wearables in the next 12 months?
Well, I think that when it comes to the communication, it has to be a standard that is broadly accepted. So if we look at the Bluetooth low energy, Apple has had that since the iPhone 4S. However, if we look at Android, it just came available on the Android platform, and partially, not even across all the products, only this summer. And until a technology is widely disseminated, it's not going to be broadly usable. So I think that for now, it's just Bluetooth Low Energy.
I just look at it a different way. I mean, we call it Bluetooth Smart now, so it's really cool. If you pick up an iPhone, it says Bluetooth Smart Ready. It doesn't say some new technology ready.
Yep.
And there's 1 billion devices there. There's 1 billion gateways already in the marketplace that are Bluetooth Smart Ready. So it's inevitable that Bluetooth Smart will be the technology for things that are low data rate, very small power consumption, and to the point, the ecosystem's there, the branding's there. What needs to happen is we need, as the technology vendors, we need to drive down current consumption, form factor, create further integration, and give our customers an opportunity to get products to market that are better and quicker.
Okay, so Sujata, how is Freescale helping to drive down the issues or the challenges that are out there?
Well, to his point, it's driving the integration level and getting to smaller form factors and reduced power consumption. It's also, I can't separate hardware and software because the software is a very critical piece of the overall solution. In fact, a majority of the development efforts now in most applications are spent on the software side. So our job is to make sure we're providing the right hardware platform for the software to be written to run on that, because in the end, it's about that killer app. So it's the people in this room that are going to be creating these killer apps, and those of us that are the content providers or the technology providers need to provide a platform that enables that innovation and does it in a simple way. So for example, the wearable reference platform that we're creating is running Android 4.3 on it and will be offered as a standard Android SDK, allowing developers to just run their code on it because it's got the standard API. For companies that are hardware manufacturers, we're providing the hardware platform. We've worked with our partners because we're not experts on our own, so we work with our ecosystem to develop these solutions, and expertise behind form factor and power consumption was really considered in deciding the components that are used on the board, the types of features that we're going to support, and provide the scalability to add features and capabilities in the future.
So does it have to be Android? Hamid, what do you think? You're a software developer as well. Is there any other software platform you could use once you've got the hardware ready?
Well, I think that you have to look at what is dominant in the market. In the market, you have iOS and you have Android. So if you want to be in wearables, you have to support not just one, but both of these standards.
Okay. So thinking about iOS for a second, there's been a lot of hype about an iWatch that doesn't exist yet at this stage. Does anyone have any insights for us on what that might look like, where it might appear, perhaps? From the panel?
Well-kept secret.
You're all looking like you'd love to tell us, but you can't. Okay. So moving on. Which are the technologies that you think will start to appear soon? So we've got the classics, the movement, the accelerometer, tracking movement and stuff like that. Do you think that things like blood pressure, EKG, altimeter or magnetometer, which are the ones that you think are going to be the next, powering the next generation of devices? I mean, we heard from a panel yesterday that we don't need another cheap plastic wristband that tracks movement. So what's going to be selling well in 2014? So Jeff, maybe you can start?
At least for me, I think, just adding more sensors probably isn't the answer today.
Okay.
To me, the answer is, building a platform where you've got enough computing capability, the radio capability, enough memory so you can develop software quickly. And I'd also, on the operating system, make a distinction between the operating system that runs on the gateway, that runs on the cell phone, if you like, that's the intermediate point between the cloud and the wearable, and the software that runs on the wearable. Because what we really see is people want to optimize. If you want to drive the current consumption down, you get the right components, you write the software very efficiently. And some of these heavy rate operating systems really aren't the way to write the embedded software. So I think it's really about building an efficient platform that can enable new algorithms, drive down current consumption, drive down the cost, and then drive up adoption.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the floor at this stage? I'm very happy to take questions if anyone has something they'd like to ask. Gentleman over there at the back.
Yeah, I want to preface by saying I really like CSR products, but it seems as though your policy is designed to make sure that your only customers are big companies and that hackers can go away. If somebody wants to a small, very small company wants to work with your chip, what can they do?
So just to make sure that everybody heard that question, the gentleman said that he really likes CSR products, but he wonders how CSR can work with smaller companies.
First of all, I guess there's many, many small companies by definition. And I guess I'm a little bit worried to hear that. That's not the way we look upon our business. So on our website, we have developers kits. It can all be downloaded. But if there's specific things, maybe we should talk afterwards. I can connect you to the right people. That's certainly not the way that we position our development kits for small hackers.
Can I add something?
You're very welcome.
Well, one of the reasons why we created Sensoplex is exactly that. Before, as I mentioned, I was heading semiconductor companies. And as a semiconductor company, you have to assign your resources where you get the most bang for the buck, which means large customers. But
I'd like to respond to that. I'm not asking to have my hand held. It just appears you can't even get the data sheets or anything.
Let's talk. That problem shouldn't exist, but if it is, we should.
I think that's something that seems to be a situation we should take out of this conference. If you're building the reference design, how critical? I'd just like to ask Suyato again. If you make the wrong decisions in the start, how is it going to affect? For example, why don't I just get a Raspberry Pi and use that as the basis for my next wearable?
So the issue with Raspberry Pi is it's a general application board, so it's designed to really just provide demos of capabilities. It's not a productizable solution. Also, again, to this gentleman's point, the components on that board are not readily available. So when we went through the process of creating this reference design, we worked with our partners to select products that are available to the mass market and also products that address the key challenges and provide the scalability. So a processor that's being used on the platform can be scaled upward in performance or scaled downward, and those are some of the key things that we needed to provide.
Okay, so scaling up and scaling down. Now, imagine that you've been inspired by the last couple of days here at this conference, and you go back to your base and you think, I'm going to design the ultimate 2014 wearable. How can I do that? Hamid, do you offer people a turnkey solution? I can just come to you with an idea and you'll turn it into a prototype?
yes, so what we try to do is that we try to be the middleman between the CSRs and the Freescales of the world and other companies and the small companies. So because we combine multiple customers who have larger volumes, and we believe that we have access to newer chips from the larger semiconductor companies. And our goal is to provide a turnkey solution that starts with helping define the product, talking about the trade-offs, and then designing it, providing prototypes that will be taken to the market for market testing very quickly, and then leading to the final product definition and manufacturing.
Okay, do you want to just add anything to that?
10 seconds. I mean, it's about the development kit, which is the reference design, the software development environment, proven RF, and really then allow the environment to build on top of it.
Okay, thank you. So I looked at Wikipedia this morning about the definition of wearable technology, and I was a bit ashamed, actually. I think we have to do some work on that as a team. Do you think the name wearable technology itself is going to be putting the consumer off, or is that something that people are going to come to live with, or whatever? Because it sounds a bit like, would I give my mum wearable technology? Does she want wearable technology?
Well, I think wearable technology is a broad term. There's so many different applications underneath it. The consumers are going to relate to the specific applications and what it does for them. Wearable technology is something I think that applies more to this audience. Your general consumer is not going to really understand the term wearable.
Well, there was a suggestion that we should merge it with wearable computing on Wikipedia, which I think is probably the wrong thing, but I'd love to find out, how you define wearable technology in the future.
Well, I think that for us nerds, wearable technology works fine because we understand the technology better. But for the average consumer, they're going to refer to that as activity detector or fall detector or the product that they will buy for a given purpose. So I think that they're not advertising to consumers is not going to be talking about wearable technology.
Perhaps another way to look at it is like, if you're looking about what happened in the smartphone, 3G phones, maybe that didn't catch on, but everyone talks about their smartphone. I think the same thing is going to happen. Or if you look now, listen to sort of smartphone commercials on the radio, people are actually advertising LTE phones, and I never thought consumers would get LTE. No. But they do, yeah? And I think that's going to be the same thing. There's going to be things people look for in their wearable device, fuel band, whatever it is, there'll be a brand, and then they'll look for something in there. And by analogy, I would say Bluetooth Smart is something that consumers are really going to grab hold of over the next 2 to 10 years. It's going to be the thing they look for in the same way as Wi-Fi has crept its way into the lexicon.
Yes, it has. And one thing I have a personal grumble about is battery life. So it's never enough. There's never enough power. My charger comes with me. I lost the dongle that charges up my Fitbit, and it cost me $20 to replace it. So that was, idiot tax. So and it cost me painful. So how do we? Maybe we don't solve the battery life, but maybe we get the devices to chew less battery.
Yeah, exactly. So, batteries have certain limitations in the technology and what they can do. So what we do is try to optimize the solution for power consumption, and whether it's based on the component selection, but you also have to look at it as a system, how those components interact with each other. For instance, on the reference platform we've created, it's a hybrid architecture approach. So there's a main processor that can be used when the connectivity is required or when you need to drive the display, and then it can go into a deep sleep mode and save power, and you use the companion microcontroller to do some of the housekeeping functions and monitoring the sensors. And when data comes in, then it goes and wakes up the processor. So things like that with the components that you select and how you put those components together help really extend battery life.
So good engineering, absolutely. The only thing I'd add is I think there will be some sort of harvesting of energy in some regard. There's probably some sort of light energy will be used to charge the batteries.
Sign me up. And Hamid?
I think it's all a question of trade-offs, because if you want the lowest possible energy consumption, you have to look at the components, and what's consuming that is really the communication radio, it is the processor, the sensors, and the display. So if you have a display, and if you want to have real-time communication, and if you want to have accurate sensors, it's going to be higher than if you just have accelerometers and no display.
Or there's trade-offs in costs. So for display, there's e-ink displays that are used in e-readers that provide very low power, but they're at a higher price point.
Okay, so before we wrap, we have a question from the back, gentlemen.
You touched on photovoltaic slightly. What is the outlook of alternative sources like isoelectric or thermal electric in an alternative source of power?
So the question for everyone was about alternative sources of power and what's the options out there right now.
Well, I've looked at that, and unfortunately, I think that there is nothing around the corner. There is solar, but it has its own limitations. But looking at piezo or looking at other things, it's right now more a lab curiosity than a technology that can be taken to production. So for now, we're stuck with batteries.
Okay, so you want to do
I just add, I think it's to do with augmenting it, yeah. So you've got one lever you can do which drive down the current consumption of your device. Then what you can do by improving the software and the hardware implementation, you're still going to need a battery in there in some way, but if you can scavenge some energy, then I think you can, give some more longevity to your battery.
So we're going to squeeze in one question, like scavenging energy, I love. We're going to squeeze in one question from over here. Okay, so Nirvana time.
Factor, or would you, add functionality, or would you just go for increased, battery life?
Okay, just to recap, if you had a battery that lasted 2 or 3 times longer, would you pack in extra stuff?
I live a peripatetic life, yeah? So my desire I wouldn't need to charge stuff so much, but as a personal opinion, I think
I mean, the use models are so different. It's depending on the end application, what you're trying to achieve. But if those options exist, our job with the technology we're providing, it's still to maximize battery life, regardless of what type of battery it is.
Okay, so in summary, thank you very much to our panel. It depends on what you put in it, it's going to be what you get out of it, and that wraps up this session. So thank you to Sujata from Freescale, Jeff, and to Hamid.